Sarah Miller woke up earlier than usual that morning. The sun was barely peeking through her apartment window as she checked her phone for the third time to make sure her alarm hadn't failed her. It hadn't. She was just too excited and nervous to sleep. Today was her first day as a waitress at Savory and Soul, one of the most popular upscale restaurants in downtown Chicago. The job meant everything to her. With rent increasing and student loans piling up, this position at a high-end restaurant promised the tips she desperately needed. Sarah carefully ironed her new black uniform, making sure every crease was perfect. She pulled her blonde hair back into a neat ponytail and applied just enough makeup to look professional. First impressions mattered, especially in the service industry. "You can do this," she told her reflection in the mirror. "Just smile, be polite, and don't drop anything." The restaurant was even more impressive in daylight than it had been during her evening interview. Smooth jazz played softly in the background as the morning staff prepared for the day. The rich smell of fresh bread and coffee filled the air. "Sarah, right on time," said Michael, the floor manager, a tall man with a friendly smile but serious eyes. "Let me introduce you to the team." She met the other waitstaff, the bartenders, and the kitchen crew in quick succession, trying her best to remember everyone's names. They seemed nice enough, though she noticed some of them giving her skeptical looks, probably wondering if the new girl could handle the fast pace of a premium restaurant. After the introductions, Michael took Sarah aside for some final instructions before the doors opened for lunch service. "We pride ourselves on excellent service here at Savory and Soul," he explained, his voice dropping slightly. "Our clientele expects the best, and we deliver it. Every single time." Sarah nodded eagerly. "Of course, I'll make sure every customer is happy." Michael's expression became more serious. "There's one more thing you should know. We've had some issues lately with people dining and dashing, especially on busy nights." "Oh, that's terrible," Sarah replied, genuinely surprised that people would try to skip out on bills at such a nice establishment. "Yes, it's been happening more frequently. Last month alone, we lost over $2,000 to dine-in dashers." Michael sighed heavily. "Just keep an eye out for suspicious behavior. Trust your instincts." As he walked away, Sarah felt a new weight of responsibility. She didn't want to make mistakes on her first day, especially not expensive ones that could cost the restaurant money. The lunch rush began, and Sarah was thrown into the deep end immediately. She managed to keep up, though she mixed up a few orders and received some impatient glances from both customers and her coworkers. By mid-afternoon, her feet were already aching in her new shoes. During a brief lull, Tina, a veteran waitress with 10 years at Savory and Soul, offered some advice. "You're doing okay for your first day," she said, refilling her water bottle at the staff station. "But remember, in this business, you got to be careful. You need to learn to size people up quickly." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, massaging her sore feet. Tina leaned closer. "Just between us, you can usually tell who might be trouble. The manager won't say it directly, but you'll learn to spot the signs." Sarah frowned slightly, uncertain what Tina was implying, but nodded anyway. She wanted to fit in and learn from the experienced staff. As the dinner shift approached, Sarah took a deep breath. The real test was about to begin. The restaurant would be packed, the orders more complicated, and the customers more demanding. She straightened her uniform and prepared herself. Little did she know that this evening would change the course of her career forever. The Friday evening rush at Savory and Soul was in full swing. Every table buzzed with conversation, clinking glasses, and the occasional burst of laughter. The rich smells of sizzling steaks and fresh-baked bread filled the air. For Sarah, it felt like being caught in a whirlwind as she rushed between tables, trying to keep up with orders and not make mistakes. "Table 12 needs water refills," Michael, the floor manager, reminded her as he passed by with a tray of drinks. Sarah nodded quickly, grabbing a water pitcher. Her feet already ached in her new shoes, and she still had 6 hours left in her shift. Despite the exhaustion, she put on her brightest smile. Good tips tonight could help with next month's rent. Just as she finished serving a family of 4, the front door opened. Sarah glanced up to see a man enter alone. He was black, appeared to be in his mid-40s, and was dressed in dark jeans, a simple button-down shirt, and a casual blazer. Nothing about him screamed wealthy customer, but nothing suggested otherwise either. He was simply average. The host greeted him and checked his reservation. "Right this way, sir," the host said, leading him to table 12, one of Sarah's tables. Sarah watched as he sat down, pulling out his phone to check something before tucking it away. She noticed Tina and another server exchange glances, but thought nothing of it. "Table 12 is yours," Michael told her as he passed again. "Solo diner." Sarah approached the table with a professional smile. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to Savory and Soul. My name is Sarah, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." The man looked up with warm, intelligent eyes. "Thank you, Sarah. It's my first time here. What do you recommend?" His voice was deep and well-spoken, with a hint of a southern accent. Sarah relaxed slightly. "The cedar plank salmon is our specialty, and the Chet's ribeye is exceptional," she offered. "The salmon sounds perfect," he said with a nod. "And I'll start with the spinach salad." Sarah jotted down his order. "Would you like something to drink?" "Just water for now, please," he replied. As Sarah walked toward the kitchen to place his order, she passed by Tina, who raised an eyebrow. "Solo guy at 12, Tina whispered. "Keep an eye on that one." Sarah frowned slightly. "Why? He seems nice enough." Tina shrugged. "Just saying, the quiet ones can be trouble. Remember what Michael said about dine and dashers." Sarah looked back at table 12. The man was sitting quietly, looking around the restaurant with interest, occasionally checking his phone. Nothing about him seemed suspicious, but Tina's words stuck in her mind. When the salad was ready, Sarah delivered it promptly. "Here you are, sir. Can I get you anything else while you wait for your main course?" "This looks great, thank you," he said, genuinely appreciative. "Everything seems wonderful here. How long have you worked at Savory and Soul?" "Actually, this is my first day," Sarah admitted with a small laugh. "Well, you're doing a fine job," he said kindly. "First days can be tough in any profession." Something about his comment made Sarah wonder what he did for a living. He had the calm confidence of someone successful, despite his casual appearance. As the evening progressed, Sarah continued serving her other tables while keeping an attentive eye on table 12. The man ate his salad slowly, savoring each bite. When she brought his salmon, he thanked her with the same genuine warmth. From across the restaurant, Sarah noticed Michael watching table 12 with an odd expression, almost like recognition followed by surprise. He started to approach, but then got called away by another server with a problem at the bar. Several times throughout the meal, Sarah caught other staff members glancing at table 12. A bartender whispered something to a server, who looked over with wide eyes. Sarah wondered if she was missing something important. When the man finished his salmon, Sarah returned to clear his plate. "How is everything?" "Excellent," he replied with satisfaction. "Perfectly cooked. My compliments to the chef." Sarah beamed, feeling she'd done something right on her challenging first day. "Would you care to see our dessert menu?" The man smiled. "I'd love to. I have a weakness for sweets." As Sarah walked away to retrieve the dessert menu, Tina caught her by the elbow. "Better get his payment before dessert," she whispered urgently. "Trust me on this one." Sarah hesitated, looking back at the man who was now typing something on his phone. He certainly didn't look like someone planning to run out without paying, but this was her first day, and she didn't want to make mistakes. With the dessert menu in hand and Tina's warning echoing in her mind, Sarah returned to table 12, not realizing she was about to make a decision that would change everything. The restaurant buzzed with Friday night energy. Conversations and laughter filled the air as servers rushed between tables. Sarah had been on her feet for nearly 8 hours, but the dinner rush kept her moving. Marcus finished the last bite of his perfectly seared salmon and set his fork down with satisfaction. He took a sip of water and glanced at the dessert menu Sarah had left earlier. When Sarah returned to check on him, Marcus smiled up at her. "That was excellent. I think I'll try the chocolate lava cake for dessert." Something flickered across Sarah's face. Hesitation, then resolve. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, clutching her notepad tightly. "Sir, I'm sorry, but you'll need to pay for your meal before I can bring you dessert," she said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. Marcus blinked, surprised. He looked around at nearby tables where other customers were clearly enjoying multi-course meals without interruption for payment. "Excuse me," he asked calmly. "Is this a new policy? I've never been asked to pay mid-meal before." Sarah's cheeks flushed red. It's, restaurant policy for certain situations. She couldn't meet his eyes as she spoke. Marcus set the menu down slowly. And what situations would those be, exactly? At the next table, a group of businessmen in expensive suits were ordering their third round of drinks, with several desserts arriving. No one had asked them to pay first. We've had some issues with people dining and dashing, Sarah explained, her voice strained. My manager told us to be careful. I see, Marcus said, his expression unreadable. And what made you decide I might leave without paying? Sarah's discomfort was now obvious to anyone watching. It's not personal, sir. Just a precaution. A precaution you're only taking with me, Marcus observed, glancing around the dining room again. Not with any other customers I can see. An older couple at a nearby table had begun to notice the exchange. The woman frowned, leaning toward her husband to whisper something. Sir, if you'd prefer not to pay now, I can cancel the dessert order, Sarah offered, clearly wanting the conversation to end. Marcus took a deep breath. I'd like to speak to your manager, please. Sarah's face paled. I'm sorry if I offended you. I'm just following. Your manager, Marcus repeated firmly. Now, please. With trembling hands, Sarah nodded and hurried away. She nearly crashed into Michael near the kitchen doors. What's wrong? Michael asked, noticing her distress immediately. Table 12, she stammered. The customer wants to speak with you. I asked him to pay before ordering dessert, and he's upset. Michael frowned. We don't have that policy. Why would you ask a customer to pay mid-meal? Because of the dine and dashers you mentioned, Sarah explained desperately. You said to trust my instincts and... Wait, Michael interrupted, looking toward table 12. His eyes widened in recognition. Oh no, Sarah, do you know who that is? She shook her head, confused by Michael's sudden change in demeanor. That's Marcus Johnson, Michael said, his voice tight with concern. The name meant nothing to Sarah. Who? Michael ran a hand through his hair, clearly stressed. Marcus Johnson, he owns this restaurant. Actually, he owns the entire savory and soul chain across the country. Sarah felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. What? But he's... She couldn't finish the sentence. Dressed casually? Yes, he does that, Michael explained quickly. He likes to experience his restaurants as a regular customer would. No special treatment. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. The casual clothes. The way no one had recognized him. The assumptions she had made based on. I've made a terrible mistake, she whispered, the full weight of her actions crashing down on her. Michael was already moving toward Marcus's table, with Sarah frozen in place behind him, wondering if she had just lost her new job on day one. Michael approached Marcus's table with quick steps, his face showing a mix of respect and worry. Sarah trailed behind him, feeling as if she were walking to her own execution. The restaurant seemed suddenly quieter, though it was probably just her imagination. Mr. Johnson, Michael said, his voice professional but warm. It's wonderful to see you tonight. I hope you've been enjoying your meal. Marcus looked up at Michael with a calm expression that revealed nothing about his thoughts. Michael, good to see you too. I was having a lovely evening until just now. Sarah stood slightly behind Michael, trying to make herself as small as possible. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure everyone in the restaurant could hear it. Michael turned slightly, gesturing toward Sarah. This is Sarah Miller. She just started with us today. Her first day, actually. Marcus nodded, his gaze shifting to Sarah. Yes, we've met. Sarah seemed concerned I might leave without paying my bill. A couple at the next table had stopped eating, clearly listening to the conversation. The woman's eyes widened as she recognized Marcus, whispering something to her companion. Mr. Johnson, I can't apologize enough, Michael began, his professional demeanor cracking slightly. This is completely unacceptable and... Marcus held up his hand, stopping Michael mid-sentence. Before we continue, I'd like Sarah to understand exactly what happened here. He motioned to the chair across from him. Please, sit down. Sarah looked at Michael, who nodded quickly. She sat down nervously, her legs feeling like jelly. Sarah, Marcus said, his voice surprisingly gentle, do you know who I am? She swallowed hard. Michael just told me. You're Marcus Johnson. You own this restaurant. Not just this restaurant, Michael added quickly. Mr. Johnson owns all 27 Savory and Soul locations across the country. He started the chain 15 years ago. Marcus nodded. That's right. I built this business from nothing. Started with one small place in Atlanta with just 8 tables. There was pride in his voice, but no arrogance. Now, why do you think I was singled out to pay before receiving my full meal? The question hung in the air. Several nearby diners had abandoned any pretense of not listening. I made a terrible assumption, Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Based on how you were dressed, I thought. She couldn't finish the sentence. Based on how I was dressed, Marcus repeated. Or based on who I am. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Both, I think. You weren't wearing expensive clothes, and you were dining alone. And you're a black man. Marcus finished for her. Let's be clear about what happened here. Michael shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Johnson, I assure you this isn't what we teach our staff. If you'd like, I can. Michael, Marcus interrupted again. I'd appreciate a moment to speak with Sarah directly. Michael nodded quickly. Of course, sir. Take all the time you need. He retreated, stopping at nearby tables to ensure other customers were being attended to, though many were more interested in the drama unfolding before them. Marcus leaned forward slightly. Sarah, look at me. She forced herself to meet his eyes, expecting to see anger. Instead, she saw something more complex, disappointment mixed with determination. I visit my restaurants regularly without announcing myself, he explained. I need to experience them as customers do. Today, I experienced something I've dealt with my entire life, being judged by the color of my skin. I'm so sorry, Sarah whispered, a tear escaping down her cheek. I don't want your tears, Marcus said firmly. I want your understanding. Do you know what happens next? Sarah took a shaky breath. You'll have me fired. Marcus studied her for a long moment. Actually, no. That would be the easy solution. But it wouldn't solve the real problem, would it? Sarah looked at him in confusion, wondering what he could possibly have in mind instead. We're going to have a much longer conversation, Marcus said, because what happened here tonight isn't just about you and me. It's about something much bigger. The restaurant continued its busy Friday night service, but Sarah's world had stopped spinning. She sat across from Marcus Johnson, owner of the very restaurant where she had just committed the most embarrassing mistake of her career. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded them in her lap. I should get back to my tables, Sarah said weakly, glancing toward the dining room where other servers were covering for her. They're being taken care of, Marcus replied calmly. He gestured to Michael, who had quietly reassigned her section. This conversation is more important right now. A server approached with 2 cups of coffee, setting them down without a word before quickly retreating. Marcus added a small amount of cream to his cup and stirred it slowly. I started washing dishes at a restaurant when I was 16, Marcus began, his voice measured and thoughtful. By 19, I was cooking. By 23, I was an assistant manager. And at every step, I had to work twice as hard to get half the recognition. Sarah listened, not sure where he was going with his story, but knowing she needed to hear it. When I tried to get a loan to open my first restaurant, I was rejected by 7 different banks, he continued. The 8th only approved me when I brought a white friend to the meeting who pretended to be my business partner. He took a sip of his coffee. Even after I opened my first successful location, suppliers would walk in and ask to speak to the owner, not believing it could be me. Customers would complain about prices to me, then accept the exact same explanation from my white manager. A heaviness settled in Sarah's chest as she began to understand the weight of her actions. I had no idea. Most people don't, Marcus acknowledged. That's part of the problem. The assumptions are so automatic that people don't even realize they're making them. He leaned forward slightly. Tell me, Sarah, why did you really ask me to pay before my dessert? She wanted to look away but forced herself to maintain eye contact. Tina mentioned we needed to size people up who might be trouble, and Michael had warned about dine and dashers. I guess I made a judgment based on what society has taught you to fear, Marcus finished for her. Without even knowing it, you categorized me as a potential threat. Sarah felt tears threatening again but blinked them back. Yes, she admitted. And I'm so ashamed. Shame doesn't help anyone, Marcus said firmly. Action does. Learning does. From across the restaurant, Michael watched their conversation with nervous glances. Two other servers whispered near the kitchen doors, occasionally looking their way. So what happens now? Sarah asked. I understand if you want me fired. Marcus shook his head. Firing you would be easy. It would make a statement to the staff, sure, but it wouldn't change anything fundamental. The next person hired might carry the same unconscious biases. He took another sip of his coffee, thinking. This restaurant chain was built on a simple idea that good food and genuine hospitality should be available to everyone, regardless of who they are. Clearly, we still have work to do. Sarah nodded, a tiny spark of hope flickering that she might not lose her job after all. I come from a family where mistakes were learning opportunities, Marcus continued. My grandmother used to say, a smart person learns from their mistakes, but a wise person learns from the mistakes of others. He set his cup down decisively. Tomorrow morning, I want you to come in before your shift. We're going to have a staff meeting, and you're going to share what happened tonight, what you learned, and how we can all do better. Sarah's eyes widened. You want me to tell everyone what I did? Yes, Marcus said simply. Not as punishment, but as education. Sometimes the most powerful teaching tool is someone saying, I was wrong, and here's what I learned. For the first time since the incident began, Sarah felt something beyond shame, a sense of purpose. This terrible mistake could become something meaningful. I'll do it, she said, her voice finding new strength. I want to make this right. Marcus nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. Good, because this isn't just about tonight. This is about changing the culture, one honest conversation at a time. The next morning, Sarah arrived at Savory and Soul an hour before her scheduled shift. Her stomach twisted with anxiety as she saw the restaurant staff gathered in the dining area, chairs arranged in a circle. Michael stood near the entrance, greeting employees as they arrived. Good morning, Sarah, Michael said, his tone more formal than usual. Mr. Johnson is waiting in the private dining room. He'd like to speak with you before the meeting begins. Sarah nodded and made her way to the back of the restaurant. The private dining room door was partially open. She took a deep breath, knocked gently, and stepped inside. Marcus sat reviewing papers, dressed in a crisp navy suit that was worlds apart from his casual attire the night before. He looked up and gestured to the chair across from him. Thank you for coming early, he said. I wanted us to be on the same page before speaking to the staff. I barely slept last night, Sarah admitted. I kept thinking about what I did and how it must have made you feel. Marcus set his papers aside. That's a good start, trying to understand the impact of your actions. But today isn't about making you feel worse. It's about growth. He pulled out a folder and opened it. I've been reviewing our training materials. There's nothing explicitly addressing bias in customer service. That's a failure on my part as an owner. Sarah looked surprised. You're taking responsibility. But I'm the one who. Leadership starts at the top, Marcus interrupted. If we don't teach our staff to recognize their biases, we're setting everyone up for failure. The door opened and Michael entered with Tuna and the rest of the management team. They took seats around the table, all looking nervous. Let's head out to the main meeting, Marcus said, standing up. Remember, Sarah, honesty is what matters today. The main dining room had transformed into a meeting space. About 30 employees sat in a circle, whispering among themselves until Marcus entered. The room fell silent immediately. Marcus moved to the center of the circle. Good morning, everyone. I'm Marcus Johnson, owner of Savory and Soul. Some of you know me, some don't. I usually prefer to visit my restaurants quietly, experiencing them as customers do. He paused, looking around the room. Last night, something happened that concerns me deeply, not just as an owner, but as a human being. All eyes turned to Sarah as Marcus gestured for her to join him. Her legs felt wooden as she walked to the center of the circle. This is Sarah Miller. She started working here yesterday, Marcus continued. Sarah, would you share with everyone what happened last night? Sarah's mouth felt dry. She looked around at the curious faces of her colleagues and found her voice. I served Mr. Johnson last night, though I didn't know who he was, she began. After his main course, when he ordered dessert, She swallowed hard. I asked him to pay for his meal first, before I would bring his dessert. Murmurs rippled through the group. Some staff members looked confused, others uncomfortable. I didn't ask any other customer to pay early, Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. I made a judgment based on how Mr. Johnson looked. A black man in casual clothes dining alone. I assumed he might not pay his bill. I was wrong, and my actions were discriminatory. The room fell completely silent. Several staff members looked down at their hands. Others exchanged glances. Marcus stepped forward again. I'm not here to shame Sarah. In fact, I respect her courage in admitting her mistake. What I want to know is, how many of you have made similar judgments about customers based on their appearance? Slowly, uncomfortably, several hands raised, including Tana's and even Michael's. This isn't just Sarah's problem, Marcus said firmly. This is a systemic issue. We all carry biases from our upbringing, from media, from society. The question is, what do we do about them? He walked around the circle, making eye contact with different staff members. From today, Savory and Soul is implementing new training for all employees. We'll learn to recognize our biases and develop tools to ensure every customer receives equal treatment. Sarah watched as her colleagues nodded, some looking relieved, others thoughtful. This isn't optional, Marcus continued. This is fundamental to who we are as a business. Either we serve everyone with dignity and respect, or we don't deserve to serve anyone at all. In that moment, standing in the center of a circle of her peers, Sarah realized this job would teach her far more than just how to carry plates and take orders. 2 weeks after the incident, Sarah arrived early for her shift. The restaurant had changed in subtle but important ways. New signs in the staff area reminded everyone of the company's values: dignity, respect, and exceptional service for all. A calendar on the wall showed the schedule for ongoing bias training sessions. Sarah hung up her coat in the staff room where Tina was already getting ready for her shift. Morning, Tina said, adjusting her name tag. Ready for another day? Almost, Sarah replied, pulling her hair back into a neat ponytail. I have that meeting with Mr. Johnson and the training team first. Since the staff meeting, Marcus had been surprisingly present at this location. He divided his time between overseeing the kitchen, observing service, and developing the new training program. He had asked Sarah to join the committee helping create these materials. You know, I thought for sure you'd be fired that night, Tina admitted, lowering her voice even though they were alone. Instead, you're working directly with the owner. That's something. Sarah shook her head. It's not a promotion, Tina. It's a responsibility. He wants me involved because I need to learn the most. She made her way to the private dining room, where Marcus was already waiting with 2 other people, a diversity consultant named Dr. Rivera and the company's HR director. Sarah, thank you for coming in early, Marcus greeted her. We've been reviewing the feedback from the first training session. 50% of staff reported they weren't aware of their biases before our discussion. Dr. Rivera, a woman with warm eyes and a professional demeanor, slid some papers across the table. We'd like your input on these scenarios for the next training. Your perspective as someone who's recently confronted her own bias is valuable. Sarah felt a strange mix of shame and pride as she looked at the training materials. Her mistake was being transformed into a teaching opportunity. I've been thinking about something we could add, she said hesitantly. Maybe a section about code words and phrases, like when Tina told me to size people up on my first day. Those indirect suggestions can reinforce biases without anyone saying anything explicitly discriminatory. Marcus nodded appreciatively. That's excellent, Sarah. Those subtle communications often fly under the radar but have significant impact. The meeting continued for an hour, with Sarah growing more confident in her contributions. When they finished, Marcus asked her to stay behind. How are you doing with all of this? He asked once they were alone. It can't be easy being at the center of such a significant change. Sarah considered the question carefully. It's hard sometimes. A few staff members still avoid me, but most have been supportive, especially after sharing their own stories in training. Marcus smiled slightly. Change is never comfortable, but I've been watching you these past weeks. You're handling it with grace. He pulled out a folder from his briefcase. I'm implementing new service protocols across all 27 restaurants. I'd like you to review them before we finalize everything. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. Me? But I'm just someone with valuable insight. Marcus finished for her. Someone who made a mistake, owned it, and is working to be better. That's exactly the perspective we need. As Sarah took the folder, a customer arrived at the entrance of the restaurant. She was early for her reservation, but the host seated her right away. That's Mrs. Bennett, Marcus said, noticing Sarah's gaze. She comes every Wednesday for lunch, usually has the crab cakes and a glass of white wine. As they watched, the host treated Mrs. Bennett with warmth and professional courtesy. The woman was black, elegantly dressed, and carried herself with confidence. 2 months ago, staff regularly asked if she had a reservation, even though she comes every week. Marcus said quietly, "Small changes, Sarah. They add up." Sarah nodded, understanding the significance. "I should get to my section. Thank you for including me in this work." As she turned to leave, Marcus said, "Remember, this isn't just about making amends for one night. This is about creating the restaurant we should have been all along." Sarah stepped onto the dining floor with renewed purpose, the folder of protocols tucked under her arm, and a clearer vision of the server she wanted to become. 6 months had passed since that fateful Friday night. The summer heat had given way to autumn crispness, and savory and soul had transformed along with the seasons. Sarah stood near the host's stand, clipboard in hand, checking the reservation list for the evening. Her black uniform now included a small gold pin that read Shift Supervisor, a promotion she had received just 2 weeks earlier. "Everything looks good for tonight," she told the host, a new employee named James. "Remember, the Johnson party at 8 will need the private dining room set up." The front door opened, and Sarah looked up to see a young black couple enter. James greeted them warmly and led them to a table without hesitation. "Nice work," Sarah said when he returned. "That was smooth and professional." James smiled. "Just doing my job the way you trained me." Sarah felt a small surge of pride. Training new staff had become one of her favorite responsibilities. She made sure every new employee understood not just the mechanics of service, but the importance of treating all customers with equal respect and dignity. The restaurant was thriving. After implementing the new training program, customer satisfaction scores had increased by 15%. Word had spread about Savory and Soul's commitment to inclusive service, bringing in more diverse clientele. "Sarah, do you have a moment?" She turned to see Marcus standing by the kitchen doors. He visited less frequently now, confident in the changes that had taken root. "Of course, Mr. Johnson," she replied, handing the clipboard to James. They walked toward the back office, passing the wall where photos of staff now hung alongside the restaurant's mission statement. "Exceptional food, exceptional service, no exceptions." "I have some news," Marcus said once they were seated in the office. "The training program we developed here is being implemented across all 27 locations this month." Sarah's eyes widened. "That's wonderful." "There's more," Marcus continued. "I've been invited to speak at the National Restaurant Association conference about building inclusive restaurant cultures, and I'd like you to join me." Sarah sat back in surprise. "Me? Speaking in front of all those restaurant owners and managers?" "Your story, our story, is powerful," Marcus explained. "It shows how one incident, handled the right way, can transform not just a person but an entire business culture." Sarah thought about how much had changed since her first day. The nervous waitress who had made assumptions based on appearance was now helping lead a movement within the company. "I'd be honored," she finally said. "Though I'm still not sure I deserve to be the face of this change." Marcus leaned forward. "Real change doesn't come from perfect people, Sarah. It comes from imperfect people willing to learn and grow. That's you. That's all of us." As they left the office, Sarah noticed a familiar face at table 12, the same table where everything had started 6 months ago. It was Mrs. Bennett, the regular customer, dining with a younger woman who appeared to be her daughter. Sarah approached their table. "Good evening, Mrs. Bennett. Is everything to your satisfaction tonight?" "Excellent as always, Sarah," the woman replied with a warm smile. "I was just telling my daughter why I come here every week. The food is wonderful, of course, but it's more than that. I feel respected here, valued." Those simple words meant everything. Sarah thanked her and continued her rounds through the dining room, observing staff interactions with customers. No longer did she see the subtle differences in how servers treated different types of people. The change was real and lasting. At the end of her shift, Sarah stood outside the restaurant, looking up at the savory and soul sign glowing in the night. She remembered standing in the same spot on her first day, full of nervousness and unconscious biases she hadn't even recognized. The journey from that day to becoming a shift supervisor, and soon, a speaker helping other restaurants, had been challenging but transformative. One mistake, handled with honesty and a commitment to growth, had changed not just her career, but her understanding of the world. As she turned to head home, Sarah smiled to herself. Sometimes the most powerful lessons came from the most uncomfortable moments, if you were brave enough to learn from them.